pair of hikers from Rhode Island have been rescued after getting stuck in treacherous terrain on Mount Washington.
At least one hiker expressed they were feeling symptoms of hypothermia. Officials tell us the hikers were brought to safety around 10 p.m. and thankfully, there were no injuries.
This was no drill, but a real-life emergency deep in the White Mountains.
Broadcasting from the Woodpeckers studio in the great state of New Hampshire, welcome to the Sounds Like a Search and Rescue podcast, where we discuss all things related to hiking and search and rescue in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Here are your hosts, Mike and Stump.
Okay, do you know my waveform for
Yeah. Oh, I could cut out millions of them.
Can you spot my waveform for like right away?
Absolutely. Yeah, it looks like sort of like a small potato.
Really?
I'm not kidding.
Is a potato? It kind of does. I'm actually looking at the waveform. So in case you want to use this for the show, the audience, like we use this recording software where it actually like shows your wave files, and
you get
Stomp
used to
does
them.
all the editing.
Yeah.
Like, so Stomp does all the editing, and you have like these shapes. So
you have these little circles and a space before it and after it, and then there are the plosives, which is like those are spikes. They look like just a line. So yeah, you can hone in on them and cut them out really quick.
Really?
Yeah.
It's like voodoo magic to me. I have no idea how you do this audio stuff.
It's really cool. It's fun.
Yeah, I'm learning a lot. But so this is episode 27. Very excited to welcome our friend Jeff back. We'll get into more detail on the intro. But before we start with that, anything interesting you've been up to there, Stomp?
Not much, really. Just hanging around, doing some search and rescue stuff with the team just for training and qualifying hikes and things like that. We wrapped up our qualifier for the year, and we're good to go for the winter. Still very keyword on the scene, which is interesting. I don't know. I'm dealing with a dying cat, so we had to get a baby fence for the downstairs so that she wouldn't come down here and urinate on the rug and stuff like that. She's really, starting to fail. So I put this baby gate up, and the executive producer loves to come down here and hang out. So about an hour ago, I hear this like awful cry, and I open the door to the studio, and there's the executive producer sitting on the other side of the baby gate looking at me like, what the hell?
So is the executive producer the one that is on death's door? Or is
No, that's the black one, the black tuxedo cat. The other one is like a calico, but she's really just behaviorally just going downhill fast. And I don't know. What can you do? You do what you can. I mean, we're trying to care for her, and my mother's taking her out for walks every day on a leash, and she's really enjoying that, which is funny. Cats on leashes. We know that that's possible.
How old is the cat?
I don't know. She was a stray. She walked into our lives, like legit, and maybe 16 plus, I would think at this point. So, yeah, but other than that, there's not much going on. After the, I have a funny story, actually. On the way to the qualifying hike the other day, this is the, what would you call it? It's the Insecure Kilt Club in Lincoln this weekend, a.k.a. the Highland Games. Are you familiar with this?
Oh, yeah. I've never gone, but I know that's like a thing. Like people basically, it's just an excuse to get really drunk, I think.
Pretty much.
And you throw I know you throw a telephone pole. That's all.
You do something, but I laughed so hard. I went into one of the gas stations in Lincoln, and I got to give a shout out to this guy. He's leaning up against his truck. He had a kilt on, and you could tell that he only wears this thing like once a year, and he probably pulls it out of like a dusty drawer or something like that. He looks super awkward in it. He had tan sneakers on and a tan t-shirt, and he's just like looking at his phone and just looking so insecure and squirming and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And like 20 feet away, there's this guy, this really rugged macho guy in this blue Toyota with a teardrop under his left eye. I mean, it was just the funniest, the stark contrast between these two individuals was hilarious. So yeah, the kilts are in town, people, so.
Yeah. You know what that's
funny.
called, right? So I don't know. Like, I think the Highland Games are supposed to be like Scottish, right? But I think everyone just sort of misconstrues Scotland and Ireland and the whole culture.
Oh, sure.
I honestly, I have an Irish background, obviously, but I don't even know the difference. But I know that and I just found this out, like so I'm in my 40s and I just learned this, but like all these people that sort of walk around with their Irish pride in the Boston area, there's millions of us around.
Yes, they're right.
Apparently we're called plastic patties. I guess that's what they call us, is like sort of fake Irishmen.
Oh, what, the newer generations?
No, anybody that's sort of American that pretends like they're super pride, Irish pride stuff. They're
like right off the boat.
Considered, the real Irishmen call us plastic patties. So, which I'm pretty much over my Irish pride days. I was over those, I think, when I was about 18. But
that's funny. Yeah.
Have you gone to these Highland Games? I do know that they have that one thing where they throw the telephone pole, which I've always thought is kind of cool. I used to watch that on Wide World of Sports.
Yeah, it's pretty epic. I mean, no, I've never gone. I drove by it today, actually going over to Conway. There's a supply chain issue with boots. Have you seen this? It's starting to impact gear again. I know there was an issue with snowshoes. Now there's boot issues.
Really? I think there's all kinds of weird things going on, because I also heard, first of all, in Massachusetts, they had to use the National Guard to help with driving buses, kids to school with buses. But also, like, I heard that there's like a national trucker shortage as well. And then I've also seen a bunch of videos where they're saying like these container ships are not coming over at the right time. So I don't know. The world's on the brink of disaster. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. Well, I had to travel. It made me travel over to the dark side of the state, over by Conway.
Oh, no.
Route 16, be damned.
Yeah. What did you get for boots?
I picked up another pair of Solar Fugitive GTX, which is my go-to for wet weather, warmer climate, wet weather, because they just stick like a magnet. I literally I've had my last pair for 3 years, and the heel was breaking down, and I was like, enough of this. I think I was actually getting knee pain because of them. So yeah, I've got a brand new pair. I'm psyched. Yeah. It's like buying a new car. Have you ever tried them?
I've never tried that brand. I got a new pair. So last year I got Vask Snow Bourbons. Mm-hmm. And I just ordered them. So everybody will tell you, like, when you buy gear, like, oh, you have to go to the store and try it on and make sure it fits. I never do any of that. So I just order stuff online, and if I like it, I like it. If I don't, I just return it. But I bought Vask Snow Bourbons because I needed a 400-gram Thinsulate boot. Mm-hmm. And I got them, and I tried them on, and I just, my regular size. They were just too narrow for me, and I don't have wide feet. Yeah. So I returned those, and I got Keen Revel Polar boots, so Revel, and I like them. They're nice. I used them last winter, and I'm gonna keep using them until they fall apart.
Huh? Yeah, I've seen those around. They have a good rep for sure.
Yeah. But we're gonna do a winter hiking series. I think we're probably gonna have to do 2 episodes, but we'll get into that stuff. Mm-hmm. But anyway, do we want to cover some sponsor and coffee talk?
Yeah, we got a couple donations this time around. Sarah, without an H, SARA. She's, like I said, a frequent flyer, and she keeps on donating, which is really great. Thank you, Sarah. She gave us 3 coffees. James Landoli gave us 4 coffees. And, we put these on the story and stuff like that just so people can read what's going on. And thank you for all the great comments and feedback. I really appreciate it. Makes our job easier knowing that people enjoy it and want to come back and listen. It makes us want to work harder, right?
Yeah. Well, not really. I don't really want to work hard, but I'm actually like, when can we get another person to help host us so I don't have to do all of this work? But right. No, it's cool. I mean, we got enough money to cover the startup cost, and I think some of the subscriptions, which is appreciated. I mean, I don't mind paying. I mean, we don't mind paying for this, but it helps.
Yeah, and finally, we have a special thanks to Reckless Brewing, again, where you'll enjoy the best food, craft beer, and fun, just 15 minutes from Franconia Notch, and many of the 4,000 footers, and of course, less than 10 minutes from the 5 corners. Thanks, everybody, for stopping by. This has really been cool.
Awesome. All right, so you want to transition into the show summary here?
Yeah, this is going to be great. I can't wait to hear what Jeff's been up to.
Great. Yep. So tonight we're happy to welcome our friend Jeff Rogers back to the podcast. Jeff was on with us on episode 16 to talk about some of his mountaineering adventures, and we covered a rescue that happened at the time on Tuckerman Ravine. And at the end of that show, Jeff was on his way to Alaska on a new kind of adventure where he was going to be sea kayaking the northwest region of Alaska's coastline. And he just got back, so we wanted to get an update on this adventure and find out if he had to fight off any polar bears or any other interesting creatures. So we're going to do a deep dive on this in a segment with Jeff, and then if we have time later in the show, we'll cover some recent search and rescue news, and we'll see if we can squeeze that in. So I'm Mike,
and I'm Stomp. Let's get started.
All right, Stomp. So getting started, we got to do a little bear talk here. You got anything?
I am, yeah. I'm having the old Tuckermans again. I'm still working on this Tuckermans bunch that I grabbed a couple weeks back. Headwall Alt. I love it. And I love it even more because it's not an IPA.
What is an alt? What is a Headwall Alt?
Well, let me see. It's a German-style brown ale. So it's a little darker. It's not as dark as like a stout. It's like a lager ice, I would think. I mean, we'll get Steve on here from Reckless in a couple weeks and let him explain that for us.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So,
how about you?
I'm not drinking a beer tonight. I ran out of beer.
Rehydrating.
So, well, my wife got into like Trulies and seltzers and all that stuff this summer. So, we bought. I bought a bunch of them for going up to Maine or going to Winnipesaukee or wherever we're traveling over the summer. We seem to be doing something every weekend. And we just have a bunch of these seltzers for different flavors that she didn't like. Mm-hmm. They've all been just collecting in the refrigerator. So I didn't buy any beer this weekend. So I'm drinking a Bud Light seltzer, mango flavored.
Oh, wow.
So
that's interesting.
Which is, I'm not saying I'm loving it, but it's not horrible. But she has like 4 or 5 of these mango and then black cherry seltzers in the refrigerator, and I was like, instead of dumping them, I'm going to try one for the show, just instead of running out to get beer. So Bud Light seltzer.
Yum.
Yeah,
Bud's always going to be around. They're always going to come up with something to stay relevant.
Exactly. So moving on to recent hikes, I have nothing, Stomp. I haven't been out in the last 2 weekends, so hopefully you got something you can share with us.
A couple just like local things. I did the Welch Sticky Loop a couple times just to stay fit and whatever else, and the team went up Greenleaf Trail actually last night, and it was a nightmare. We were watching the weather all week, and sure enough, man, this storm, massive thunderstorm came through, rain, heavy monsoon rain. So it stopped right at 5 o'clock when we were supposed to do the training. And of course, there's nothing like Greenleaf Trail with a thunderstorm and all that stuff. I mean, it was just soaked, super slippery. And it was dark, man. By the time we got up to the hut, it was pitch black. Oh, the fall is on us.
Yeah, I know. I got, like I said, I don't have any hikes that I can recap here, but I got to get out soon before it gets too crazy because I have to do that big finish hike on Franconia to finish the 52 with a view and the 25 and the 4,000 footer. So I'm thinking like either the first or second week of October, I'm probably going to have to do that at this point just because I got some stuff going on next weekend. So
I was wondering.
Keep your calendar open, but I'll let you know what day.
So you're the spicy Cheeto guy this week.
Bunch of stuff going on that's not related to hiking, unfortunately.
Yeah, I bet. Same here. It's been sort of crazy. Anyway, let's get on to this segment, shall we?
Yeah. So I had to, just for the audience's sake, just to give everyone a heads up, I had to record this session separately. So Stomp, I think, was he might have had a hair or a nail appointment or something that night. So I cut a separate segment with Jeff for me and him to go over sort of some stuff on the Alaska trip and some other topics, which got pretty interesting, Stomp. So why don't we cut away and we'll do that segment and then we can pop back on.
Excellent.
SLASR's hiking topic of the week.
Great. So, Jeff, I know we sat down on episode 16 and talked about that rescue in Tuckerman, and we talked a little bit about some of your mountaineering adventures. And I wanted to have you back in. Me and Stomp were both talking about it. We wanted to have you back in to talk about a recap of your Alaska trip. You kind of left it that you were doing the Sea Kayaking trip, and I wanted to find out how that went and talk a little bit more about Alaska. But before we get into that, one thing that we had sort of talked about when you were on the show afterwards is you had mentioned that you had previously done some mountaineering on Mount Fuji and had dealt with some sketchy situations up there, and I think that was from like doing skiing, right? So I wanted to see, can you talk a little bit about your trip to Fuji?
Right. Yeah. So we went to Japan in I think February of 2020. Right before the pandemic really started to shut down international travel and start to affect the world. Two groups of us, basically, we rented 2 RVs and we went out and skied a bunch of different areas, whether it be backcountry or resort. We were out for 2 weeks. And we saw a lot of different areas, and one of our big objectives of the whole trip, this was kind of my idea because I'm always trying to think up these, tallest high point kind of ski adventures, was to go ski Mount Fuji. So about a week and a half into the trip, after we had done a lot of skiing of super deep powder, like neck deep powder, we went and drove down south towards Mount Fuji and went to climb that peak. So I think it was either 7 or 8 of us total, split between 2 small Japanese style like RVs that are kind of like those transformers that go from seating 4 people around a table to sleeping like 8 people magically somehow. So we rented those and we were able to sleep at the resorts and rest stops and things like that as we traveled through Japan. Yeah.
No, I never think of Japan as like a big skiing area, but I know they've done the Winter Olympics and they've got some big mountains. But what is the general like skiing or backcountry skiing like in Japan?
Right. So, Japan is famous for like the deepest powder in the world. Other than some areas that get just more snowfall, you really don't get deeper snow than Japan, especially the quality of snow, right? So, for instance, over 30 hours or so, we ended up getting, I think, 4 feet of snow over, the night where we were going to go skiing. And this just completely buried the RVs we were in. Just opening the door for the RV, which is already 3 feet off the ground. There's a whole step down system to get to the pavement, was hard. So we had to shovel them out. And then obviously at the resorts, they have an incredible amount of infrastructure and small snow blowers and workers that can clear this snow. And they basically work all night when it's that deep. The snowfall rate is so high that they just continuously clear snow for however long the storm's going. So it was definitely a awakening for what really deep skiing is. And in Japan, there's also lines that you'll see, Red Bull athletes doing, huge spines off of different mountain ranges that, you're going 60 miles per hour at least the whole way, and you got a big run out and you can do that kind of stuff. But it's mostly known for its extremely deep powder skiing and some highlight films and Red Bull movies.
Nice. And when you go to Fuji, so I know Mount Monadnock is known as one of the most climbed mountains in the world, but isn't Mount Fuji considered the busiest mountain in the world?
Yeah, Mount Fuji is in fact the busiest. That's mainly in the summer season, or I guess it would be spring, summer, fall there. I don't think it gets snow in the fall there. I'm not entirely sure, but in the winter, it's definitely climbed a lot, but it's much more rare. We had 2 other parties on the mountain, on our side of the mountain, when we were climbing it. And, you know, a lot of the stuff is just shut down, right? So in the summer, there's a train station that's like halfway up the mountain, and that just shuttles people up. And there's huge, you know, massive walkways and ropes and all this stuff, and water fountains and rest huts. All that infrastructure is closed and buried in snow, similar to Mount Washington in the winter. So it sees a lot less people.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And were you able to skin up any part of this, or was it mostly just hiking up with the skis on your back?
There was a lot of skinning. The first couple of 1,000 feet was sticky enough and not steep that we were able to skin. But it really ended up being just a big cone of ice at the end of the day. So the majority of it we did cramp on.
Nice. And then you made it all the way up to the top, and you were able to successfully ski down?
No, I wish. So what happened on Fuji is one of my buddies, Michael, he was coming up. We were at about 10,000 feet, or a little over 10,000 feet, I think it was. And I was in front, or I think maybe second to the front of the group. And this is no rope. We're all just cramponing separately. We do have a rope in our kit, but we didn't use it at this point. We didn't determine that it was necessary. There's no crevasses, and it's just, you know, straightforward icy cramponing. But Mike, he ended up slipping and self-arresting on a slope that was right below a hut that was relatively buried in snow and was a flat spot. So he fell, and I saw, I saw him on the ground after he had fallen. I didn't see the actual slide, and just looked back, and I said, "Oh, that's weird." Mike's like, on his stomach, a little bit farther down than he was. And then it kind of clicked for me. Oh, he might have self-arrested. And I was like, all right, well, good. He slipped. He self-arrested. That's great. Didn't take anybody out. He's not sliding down the mountain, and he's getting back on his feet, it looks like, or he's moving around. And then he didn't end up getting back on his feet. And he was calling out for me to come down to him. And at this point, I mean, we're up at 10,000 feet or so, and the weather wasn't perfect. I mean, it was a great weather day, very clear, but we still had at least 40 mile per hour consistent winds. So communicating, especially downward, is, difficult to get your voice out. So he's yelling at me, and I'm telling him, I don't know what he's saying, but I'm telling him, come up to this flat spot. It's a lot easier for us to hang out here. And this is more of a windbreak too, so it's less exposed. So he was laying down at this point, and I kind of got the realization that he might not be able to move, as Ben, one of our friends that was also climbing with us, climbed up to him and then started talking to him. So what ended up happening is his shoulder actually popped out of his socket. And I believe in the aftermath, after he got the x-rays, after the whole trip was over, we flew home. He was able to determine that there was a small nick or fracture or crack in one of his, either his arm or the socket of his shoulder. And that, confirms our actions for what we did afterwards, which was short rope him down the whole mountain, and take him, in a non-skiing, non-climbing capacity down the mountain without any more risk. So luckily it all worked out pretty well.
Got it. So you just had to kind of bail out on that. Yeah. Now, when you short rope somebody like that, did you even consider telling him, like, okay, maybe we can take some of your gear and you can try to ski down, or was the conditions just too dangerous for that?
Right. So the snow conditions were pretty icy. And as far as his gear goes, we took every single thing that he had other than his big puffy jacket. So he was wearing, a big puffy. He had his arm in a sling, which Derek, another one of my buddies, another person who was climbing with us, he brought a triangular bandage, which we were able to construct a sling out of and sling his arm. And then we also had a length of webbing, which I used to lead down climb, basically kick huge steps for Mike, and Derek ended up climbing behind him, kind of in a belay style, just making sure that if he did slip, Mike had someone on his line that could self-arrest him above him. And Mike, he just walked down with his offhand with an ice axe and his dominant hand in a sling, which in that capacity, I don't think he would have been able to self-arrest. And it was definitely a day where if you did slip, if you got any momentum, you were cooking down the rest of the slope. So making that call up there was kind of hard because we were obviously, it was like 11 a.m., I think. Great weather for Fuji in the winter, and snow conditions definitely acceptable that it's skiable, the other people that were with us other than Derek and myself did ski down from where we were. So it's definitely doable in those conditions, but we didn't make the summit because Mike got injured. But we were able to escort him 6,000 feet down the slope. So I thought that was a good win overall in the day.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. I was trying to figure out what the climbing gain is on Fuji. So it's a lot more than the whites, it sounds like.
So Fuji in the winter is a little bit different. You can't get to where 99.9 of the people who climb Fuji normally start. So where we started was the Gotemba train station, and this is one of the lower stations, but it's the one that you can park at with like an RV and it's plowed. So in the summer, I think you can go up a little bit higher, but we basically had an 8,000 foot day ahead of us to get to the summit, and we got most of the way there by 11 a.m., I would say. I mean, 6,000 feet by 11 a.m. is a really good pace. We started at probably 2 or 3 a.m. With skis, big group. I think we did pretty well. But of course, with that kind of injury, you have to turn around. So I think the real takeaway here, though, is we were prepared. We made the right decision. It was the right time. We had decent enough weather where this wasn't really a showstopper. We didn't need search and rescue, and a few of us were able to ski a lot of the mountain. So
nice. And did you say, I know you talked about this, but did he end up going to the hospital in Japan, or did he wait till he got back into the U.S. to get checked out? No,
so after Fuji, we had, I think, 1 or 2 more days of skiing where Mike just took it easy, and then we went home. And then he had got the x-rays and found out that he did actually mess up his bone structure, whether it be the shoulder or the arm, I forget.
Got it. And then is this the crew that you typically go on your big adventures, or was this a mix of new people that you've gone with?
Well, so for this crew, I've been on a couple different ski adventures, and I do a lot of touring with them and a lot of mountain biking and hiking. I had gone to the Cheek Shocks with them before, and we had done an overnight, but we had never done anything this big or at actual altitude, right? Which is, for me, over 12,000 or so. That's when you start getting, most people will show signs of if they're, able to handle the lack of oxygen, or if they start to change a little bit. So with this crew, it was relatively new, but I knew from Mike, the guy who gets injured, he can ride his bike 100 miles without blinking. Derek can do the same. These guys are athletes. They're all very squared away. So I really didn't have any reservations on that regard. But obviously, we did have someone slip, fall, get injured. So maybe the experience level wasn't quite there for the objective we were taking on. But again, you never know what's going to happen, so that's just what happened that day. So
yeah, well, very cool. That's interesting. I just don't think of Japan in terms of like that huge amount of snowfall, but I know, again, I've seen different movies and the Olympics with the different ski routes, so it's interesting. I always think of Japan in terms of those big, lighted cities and not so much the mountains. But I'd love to get out there someday.
Oh yeah.
But you guys got in right under the wire with COVID too.
Right. And in terms of the cities, oh man, they're there too. We went to Tokyo. We went to the most busiest intersection in the world, and yeah, there's infinite people there too. So it's kind of a contrast. Once you drive the RV, a couple hours outside of the city, it's like mountain, spread out. People have farmland, things like that. But the city, yeah, there's people sleeping in apartments that make a studio in New York look huge. So yeah, definitely. But yeah, I highly recommend if you ever can get out to Japan. It's quite the experience. The food itself is enough reason to travel. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, that's good stuff. But I wanted to switch to Alaska here. So when you were on the show last time, we talked about some of your adventures on Denali and Mount Sanford. But you were heading out to do a new adventure. So for the audience, just a reminder. So Jeff is he's done a lot of, high elevation mountaineering, and he's sort of like one of the most experienced backcountry skiers in the Northeast area here. So he's got a lot of experience in those areas. But sea kayaking, I think, is something you've gotten into in the last couple of years. So you were heading to Alaska to do like a sea kayaking adventure with a pretty prolific sea kayaker. But before we get into the details of that adventure, can you talk a little bit about how you got into sea kayaking and sort of what the appeal is to you for doing it?
Yeah, absolutely. So sea kayaking is kind of a niche thing, not a lot of people do it. But it's another way to, I guess, adventure or see the world with some sort of medium between you and what you're traveling through, right? So if you're skinning on snow and you're using skis and you're skiing down a mountain, or you're pedaling a mountain bike on a trail or on a road, or paddling a kayak out in the ocean, it's just another way to adventure. So in that, lowest level, that's exactly what all of my outdoor adventures are kind of pursuing, is just seeing the world and the adventure. It's not necessarily the adrenaline or, crazy ski mountaineering or skiing steep lines. It's more just seeing the world and being able to adventure whatever format it is. So my buddy, my main climbing partner, Alex, he had done a Knowles course, and he had done a 30-day sea kayaking trip. And I thought that was pretty crazy. I'd never done any sea kayaking. And this was a year before we went and skied Denali. So when we went to Denali, right after that, we spent 5 days in Whittier renting a tandem sea kayak and sea kayaking and camping near the glaciers that fed into the ocean there, or into Whittier Bay. And that opened my eyes completely. I was like, wow, this is another way to carry not only what you can carry in a backpack, or in panniers on a bike, but more than a backpack in a sled on snow is a tandem sea kayak or a sea kayak. You can just carry an infinite amount of gear and still, hold at least a 3, maybe 4 mile per hour pace if it's good conditions. So that kind of opened my eyes to how far you can really go, because you can pack a sea kayak for months. You can pack a ski mountaineering kit for maybe a month. Backpacking, I mean, it's really debatable on how far you can go. Some people, can bang out 60-mile days. That's not me, but it just shows you how capable that method of transport is, and that's what was so alluring to me. And also, I've just loved the ocean, right? Living near Maine, living in New England, just being by the ocean my whole life, being able to see it from the water now. Like going to Acadia and being able to just see all the mountains and cliffs from the water instead of the mountains I've hiked has just been amazing. So, my buddy Alex, he bought a sea kayak. I was interested in it. I ended up going on Craigslist, buying one. And the rest is history. We learned the Eskimo roll. We learned how to self-rescue. We learned how to do, surf waves in, how to surf launch, and just the, ordinary camping, 4-season camping in high winds and things we already knew from our previous adventures.
Got it. And then, so you've done a lot of sea kayaking around the Northeast. Have you ever gone, I guess, what's the farthest you've gone in the Northeast region?
Yeah, so sea kayaking in the Northeast, I've done a lot around the Boston area, around the Portsmouth area, and all the way up to the Canadian border on the Maine coast. So one of our trips we did from Bar Harbor to Canada coast. And that was actually during the height of the pandemic. We had a plan to go up into Canada and do some kayaking, but it was closed. So we ended up defaulting to a 8-day trip along the coast of Maine from Bar Harbor up to Canada. It was, I think, 160 something miles. I forget the specifics there, but good trip, not a crazy pace. And Maine is just, it's incredibly interesting. There's islands and caves and cliffs and different features and old military bases and history everywhere. So super fascinating.
Yeah, and I would assume from kayaking in that particular area, especially northern Maine, that you probably are going to places that people rarely ever visit, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been people there because, during the wars, World War II, at least, all these islands were used for a lot of different military purposes, a lot of sub-spotting or, early detection systems for threats. So they're having people there, but now, yeah, it's very laid back. There's mostly just lobster boats and people who are fortunate enough to sea kayak. One of the parts called the Bold Coast, I believe there's about 20 miles of, super tall cliff where you can't really land. So, yeah, it's very rare to see anyone out there that's not in a lobster boat or some sort of, yacht or something like that.
Yeah. And is there like a rule of thumb around like you have to stay a certain distance close to land, or do you go pretty far out into open water?
So that's a great question, Mike. For sea kayaking, I mean, there is, the sky is the limit. There have been people who have crossed from California to Hawaii in a sea kayak, over 2 months. So there's really no rule or standard that you have to follow. Generally, the average sea kayaker does hug the coast. But of course, I mean, we'll get into this when we talk about the Alaska trip, but there are decisions that you can make on your course, especially on big trips, where if you complete a crossing, it might save you a couple of weeks. Or if you complete a crossing, you can see an island that has a unique feature that not a lot of people see. So there is a lot of attractiveness to crossing to different islands or crossing bays. But most of the time, the excitement does happen along the land. So people tend to stick to that.
Got it. And then what are some strategies? I would assume, I'm thinking like northern Maine, even in the summer, it can get a little chilly, and when you're on the water, you never know what you're going to be dealing with. But what are some of the sort of the standard gear and strategies you use to ensure that you can stay warm even when it's, the water may be kicking up or it may be cold on the ocean? Sure.
So kayakers' biggest friend in cold water is the dry suit. So from the bottom of your toes all the way up to your neck and your wrists, you're in a heavy-duty Gore-Tex layer, which, imagine a really heavy-duty Gore-Tex raincoat and kind of triple that up. That's what a dry suit is. It's almost like a Gore-Tex gaiter in how thick it is. And that covers your entire body. And doesn't allow any water to get in. So within that dry suit, you have the option to layer however you like. The key thing is not to overlayer, but also not to underlayer, because once the dry suit's on, you have very little that you can do to adjust. You have your hand layers, your head layers. You can put or take off your life jacket, or you can use what's called an overcag, which goes over your skirt and your dry suit. And this is big marshmallow type of thing. So for the real problem with sea kayaking and staying warm is your feet and your hands. Your hands obviously are exposed to a splash of water. They're inches away from the water, millimeters away from the water sometimes when you're taking a paddle stroke. And especially once it gets wavy, they get splashed every single time. So what you do for that, at least what I've found is the best, is neoprene. What I had was a 2 millimeter, super thin, what's called a hydro skin glove. And then over that, I had a 7 millimeter neoprene mitten. And that worked for 95% of the days. Only one of the days, two of the days, I would say, because it was a long stretch of cold weather. It actually snowed in the morning, and then it was blowing like 20 to 30 mile per hour wind and in the 30s. And that was enough to kick up a little bit of surf, and my hands were cold that day. But other than that, it was pretty much perfect. That system worked great, and I had a backup pair of thicker liner gloves if I needed more.
And you don't have to worry about like sweating internally wearing the dry suit?
Well, you do to an extent, right? I mean, any sort of clothing system is susceptible to being less effective when you sweat. With the dry suit, the thing is you're kind of planning for the worst case scenario, which is you falling out of your boat into the water. So when we're kayaking up in the Arctic Ocean, water's 30 something degrees. The dry suit, if you layered for the 30 degrees, you would just be cooking, sweating the entire time while you're paddling. So you can't really layer it to that extent, but you also don't want to layer to an extent where you're nice and cool and you want to paddle fast all day. So it's kind of this balance. But really what the dry suit does is it buys you time against hypothermia if you lose your boat or fall out of your kayak. And at these temperatures in this climate, it's just an amazing piece of gear to keep you warm, right? Because you got wind, you got rain sometimes, you have, these different things that cool you off, and just being in a suit that's 100% Gore-Tex is kind of one of the more safe ways to do it versus, using dry suit bibs or a dry top or neoprene. So we went with the dry suit method.
Got it. All right. So this adventure, let's get into this, like how the hell you got into this ridiculous adventure here. So This was a sea kayaking trip in Alaska, and you were basically riding in support of a project that a lady by the name of Freya Hofmeister is doing. Can you talk about who is she and what is her project, and how did you get roped into doing this?
Yeah, sure. So Freya Hofmeister is a world-renowned sea kayaker. She's done a lot of very impressive things all over the world, mostly known for circumnavigating continents, right? So Australia, she's paddled around. South America, she's paddled around. Those are the two wildly impressive achievements that she's been able to do. She's also paddled around smaller islands like Ireland or Iceland. Things like that, just dot her achievement list. She's also done a bunch of skydiving. She's jumped out of an airplane above the North Pole, done a ton of cool stuff. So she's working on circumnavigating as her last project, North America. And North America is the largest one she's going to tackle, right? Because Australia is pretty small in terms of continents, and then South America is a little bit smaller than North America. And I was able to join her for 8 weeks, going in from Wales to Wainwright, Alaska. How I was able to get with this trip is I just messaged her on Facebook because she's been looking for new partners to paddle with. During the pandemic, it's been a lot harder for her to find paddlers, so she prefers to have a North American partner for this section. And that was kind of key for her to getting someone there, because I think, most countries couldn't travel here, and a lot of countries had at least a 14 or higher day waiting period. So that kind of explains, what she's doing and how I got the chance to join her for this trip.
Nice. And were you Did you feel, when you started looking into this, did you feel confident that this was in your wheelhouse and that you could kind of hang with somebody that's done that much, I guess, is that accomplished and has done so many adventures like this?
Well, I honestly, I guess the answer would be no. I thought the biggest crux of the entire route, it was a 38-mile crossing from Cape Espenberg to Kotzebue, Alaska. And this crosses the Kotzebue Sound. Mm-hmm. In terms of crossing, the biggest, that's kind of a thing in sea kayaking. A large crossing always increases risks because you're basically super far away from land to the extent where, everywhere you look is just pure ocean. So to get a feel for that, it's like, being super far out there on a remote mountain peak. The ability to rescue or to quickly get out of the situation or hit the off button doesn't exist, right? You're on a crossing. The only way you finish it is by getting to the end of the crossing. So the biggest problem we faced or section on the trip was the 38-mile crossing. And that's what I was most nervous about. I'd never spent, 12 plus hours in a sea kayak without getting out of it. I'd never done any crossing over, I think, 10 miles at that point. So that was where a lot of my doubt lied. However, the rest of the trip, I knew that long-term Alaskan camping was kind of what I enjoyed. Remote adventure was what I enjoyed. Mm-hmm. So I knew that aspect, as well as just, colder weather sea kayaking, suited me. The thing I hate most is when it's 90 degrees and you're just getting blasted by the sun on the ocean. That's much harder than, having 30-degree wind and being in a dry suit, in my opinion. So.
Yeah. No, one of the things I was curious about is, so you have like an established team that you've done most of your adventures, like you and it sounds like Alex sort of know each other inside and out. You're walking into this with an entirely new person that you haven't, done logistics with. You don't know sort of the camping situation and the pacing. And can you talk a little bit about that and your thoughts going into this about just making this much of a commitment with somebody that you haven't worked with before?
Yeah, that was one of the big issues of this whole trip, I think, is I didn't actually know Freya before the trip. And obviously we'll get into the negative kind of aspects of what happened during the whole trip. But it was definitely a huge change for me because, the partners I go with 90% of the time are extremely experienced, know me, or we've done trips together and maybe I'm trying to teach them something, or they're, willing to learn or willing to come with, and the trip isn't super high importance. For this trip, when you look up Freya's credentials, it's hard to, for the naive paddler, for someone who doesn't know her, for someone who's looking to do a super remote long trip, it's hard to see the negatives of what could happen. So I think a lot of us who have been paddling with Freya kind of just got mixed up in the whole, Freya's done amazing stuff. I just want to go with her and I should do this and it's going to be an amazing trip. And don't get me wrong, it was an absolutely life-changing trip, but there was a lot of things because I hadn't met her, because I hadn't, known or didn't know what she was all about and kind of her outlook on life and just trips in general. That definitely was apparent when I met her and when we started to go through the trip as the weeks went on. It was definitely one of the biggest challenges of the trip, and I didn't realize that it would be to the extent that it was. A lot of her other paddling partners had contacted me and warned me about the challenges and what was hard about it, what was going on, and how the dynamics are kind of skewed to her favor, if you will. And I took it with the best viewpoint I possibly could, because I view myself as a person who can get along with a lot of difficult people, a lot of different people and a lot of people who enjoy the outdoors. I can always find common ground with. So I just took that as kind of a challenge. If everybody is saying a lot of negative stuff about her, I think that I could turn this into a positive experience. And on the whole, it was, but a lot of the warnings that they had mentioned weren't heeded as much as I should have heeded them. So definitely an interesting dynamic, not knowing the person that you're going with.
Nice. Well, I want to dive into that a little bit, but before we do, logistically, and again, I know that you have a lot of experience sort of packing for these long, adventures from a mountaineering perspective. I have to imagine that it's not that dissimilar to logistically, some of the other things that you've done. But can you talk a little bit about the logistics? Like, how are you packing food? What is the flight situation? Are there bailout plans along the way? What is the camping arrangements? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a lot to cover. I'll try and take it, step by step. So let's just start at where you live, right? So I live in New Hampshire. I've got to fly from Logan to Seattle to Anchorage to Nome and then to Wales, Alaska, right? So right there, that's a significant amount of travel time, right? It's across the country, multiple connecting flights, transferring to airports that are pure gravel, right? Zero terminal, zero baggage claim. Your duffel bag is placed on the ground when you land where you land. So, keep that kind of mindset. Also, coming from Boston in June and landing in Wales in late June from Boston, landing in Wales early July. Wales was 38 degrees when we landed. So significant amount of temperature shock that you'll face when you do go that far and land in Wales. And that's Wales you can see Russia from. That's a real thing. People who claim you can see Russia from Alaska are telling the truth. So I figured I'd mention that too. So in terms of logistics,
Sarah Palin will appreciate that.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, that's a true thing. That's not a joke. But yeah, logistics wise, any other trip that you do, usually there's a big problem getting your gear there. Say you do a ski mountaineering trip, skis, poles, wands, gas, all that stuff's, hard to get places. Now let's introduce a 18-foot, 10-inch by 20.5-inch fiberglass boat. So now, does that fit into any carry-on luggage? Is that smaller than Chrysler Pacifica? No. It's a massive, huge, long logistical challenge, right? To get this piece of equipment that's extremely specialized, not available anywhere. If parts break on transit, you're waiting a long time to get them shipped to where you are launching your boat. That's the biggest logistical challenge, is getting that there. And then also, figuring out what you're going to do for fuel. So in the United States, hazmat parcel allows you to ship, MSR, Snow Peak, Gigapower, any of those fuel canisters that are isobutane. And in sea kayaking, it's not below 30 degrees, so you can use isobutane for gas. So all that was relatively simple. But yeah, flying the kayaks there, and hers actually came from Germany. So the logistics were just incredibly intense to get the trip going. We actually spent a little bit of time waiting for food supplies to show up at one of our halfway points. So there's a lot of things to think about with logistics, but the main idea behind these logistics and how to be successful with them is to have the amount of time that you need to plan for unforeseen consequences, and the positive outlook that, hey, our food didn't show up today. if it gets here in 2 days, that's great. We'll have a bunch of food and we can still continue our trip because, this trip is 50 days. You have to assume that things will break, things will go wrong. Your repair kit's extensive, your medical kit's extensive, things like that. And in regards to how far between villages, 2 weeks was about the max, but these villages again are a couple hundred people, and some of them don't even have runways with a building. Some of them don't even have postal offices, things like that. So when you're at a village, it may not mean that you can get what you need or send home what you need, or vice versa.
Wow. What are these people that live in the villages like?
They are incredibly friendly, happy people. It's the people that are there are a mix, right? So there's, in Point Hope, there's like a absolute melting pot of people from all over the world. You got Russian people, Japanese people, African American people, Inuit people. But in some of the other towns, it's, people from, California or Montana, and then Inuits. 99% of the people who are there, they understand that where you are on the planet is extremely remote and not easy to live in or live at. So you're always going to find a helping hand whenever you talk to any of these people. You're always going to find a friendly, demeanor when you talk to these people, because a lot of the hardships that they face, it's relieved by how well they all work together, right? So say somebody's sled breaks down, you can easily thumb a ride, get a buddy to take it back to your house and figure it out later. Or if you need water or something like that, I would walk up, talk to somebody there, and they said, oh yeah, well, I'll bring you right to the water source, hop on my ATV and we'll get you all settled. And the list goes on and on. So they were just incredibly kind people, and just a deep culture of a variety of things, whether it's whaling or shamans or, different religious beliefs that I hadn't experienced before. So absolutely great people.
Awesome. Now, is it safe to say, like, basically for bailout plans, you're looking at, like, you've got to basically just get to the next village, and then that's where you can, even then logistically it's going to be difficult, but at minimum you've got to get to a village so that you can pull the plug if you needed to, right?
Right. So yes, I guess I'll just explain maybe a scenario. Say you've got a problem and you're 3 days from a village, right? And you paddle up to the village. That village may have a list of, flights before that need to get out, and they may have, a 5-day storm that isn't letting any planes fly for the next 5 days. So unless it's a extreme emergency where, like, the Coast Guard or the U.S. Navy needs to get involved, bailing is never a simple feat. If you're at a village and it's a good weather day and you're there and there's a plane that has more room on its cargo capacity or its passenger hold, maybe you could get out that day and get to another remote village that then would connect you to Anchorage. But it's definitely a high commitment trip, right? So once you leave a village, you're in it for another week, at least 2 weeks, and when you get to that village, sometimes all we did was get water and keep going. So it's not like you're pulling up to Bob's General Store and you can buy Twinkies and the Gatorade and stuff like that. I mean, you can sometimes, but it also costs like $8 for a Gatorade. So yeah, it's a lot different up there.
Yeah. I wouldn't survive. I would not.
You probably would. I mean,
right, well, so logistically, this is like planes. Yeah, we'll see. I'm not going to test this, but it sounds very interesting. So basically, you get through the logistics piece of it, and you start off. And can you talk about sort of like what was the first week like, and how did you guys settle into a routine with camp? And at what point did you find out that maybe you and Freya weren't exactly going to be best friends for the rest of your lives?
Yeah, it was really kind of a rude awakening the first week for me. When Freya had described what she wanted for someone to join her trip, she describes him as a paddling partner and a person that is, has equal say or has equal, share of responsibilities, has equal, all this stuff. And it's simply just a fantasy because what you really are from the beginning to end is a Sherpa or guide or someone who takes care of a lot of the work of the trip for her while she's able to use her computer in the tent at night. So there's a ton of examples I can give you, but when you asked, when did I realize this stuff was going a little bit unexpectedly in my viewpoint. The first day we land in Wales, Alaska. Wales is an extremely small village, very low income, trash everywhere, 150 or so people, very friendly people, helped me out, thank God, great people. But Freya, as we were unwrapping our boats, they're packed in foam and wrap and ropes and all this stuff, so it takes you a good half hour to an hour to just cut open your boat and get it all set up and adjust everything. She said, "Hey, can you take the water bags and go get water?" And I said, "Sure, yeah, no problem." And the water bags for our trip are over 40 liters of water, right? So I go, yeah, I'll take take my half, I'll throw it in my backpack and all this stuff, and I'll go grab the water. And she was like,
so that's 100 pounds, right?
A little bit under 100 pounds. Yeah. Like 80 something, or I think, I'm not entirely sure. Yeah. Probably a little bit higher with the weight of the bags and everything like that. But that gives you an idea of what we needed for our resupplies. At least in the beginning, it was just pure salt water, no good freshwater streams. But so, it's the first day of the real trip. We've spent 3 days with each other, buying groceries, repackaging food into hundreds of Ziploc bags, sorting out food supplies, sorting out gear, packing gear, etc. And the first day we get on the trip, she's like, "Yeah, go fill up all the water." And the water source is 1.5 miles away, right? And she's saying, I'm just going to unwrap my kayak and figure it out while you go get this stuff. And I was like, "Well, you really want me to carry all this stuff back?" And she's like, "Oh, it'll be fine. Like, it's one of your responsibilities is getting all the water." And I was just like, "Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't realize that was one of our not shared camp chores, but my camp chore." Man, the rest continued that way, if you will. It was kind of hilarious how quickly my partner would go from kayaking for the day, the tent is up, and then she's in the tent until the next day where she gets out and starts kayaking early in the morning. So it was a very quick awakening of how the dynamic was going to be. And her asking for paddling partners per se is it's just very misleading. So
got it. So you're used to sort of this collaborative effort where you and Alex and whoever else you join up, you're all sort of equally dividing the work, and it's all sort of a team with a singular goal. And now you find yourself, I call it so you said Sherpa, but there's also this concept in road cycling called domestique. So you've got a team leader like the Lance Armstrong, and then there's 6 other people on that team that are basically the domestiques that are making sure that he's in position to win the race. So that's a little interesting if you're supposed to be a partner and you're the the workhorse.
Right, yeah, and I understand where Freya was coming from, right? It's her huge trip. She's done all this amazing stuff. She's incredibly famous. She's paid for the boat transportation. But at the end of the day, when you're on a trip for 8 weeks and you treat, your partner as someone who's kind of a, I don't know, second class kind of cook or Sherpa or domestique, as you say. Well, that sounds like he's the leader of the group, which would be a little bit different. But either way, it's definitely a fundamental where, after a 50-mile day of sea kayaking, I'm tired too. But, I've got to set up the bear fence, load the shotgun, cook everything, drag her kayak up the beach, hang and take down her clothing, and then do all this stuff for her. It's kind of one of those things where it makes you kind of just scratch your head. You're not what was described in the initial trip offering. But again, I'm the person who went into this trip with zero knowledge of how the dynamic was going to be or how, ultimately inexperienced and reliant on me she was. So that kind of changed the whole dynamic for a much different course than I saw, in my mind beforehand.
Interesting. Did you find that there were days that you guys sort of just had a good time out on the water, or was it just a constant grind? Because I have to imagine there's got to be some beautiful scenery. You must have seen some incredible wildlife at some point. Like, what were some of the high points for you?
Well, that's the thing. On the water, Freya is an amazing paddling partner. She, her vision for the sea, her ability to, understand different features of the terrain, how shoals affect water, how currents will affect water, tides, weather patterns, identifying clouds, things like this. You cannot have a bigger asset. So we had a lot of amazing times. We saw a variety of different wildlife, whether it was dead or alive. We saw cliffs that were, 1,500 feet tall with birds on it, in the thousands. We saw a lot of amazing things: walrus herds, whales, bowhead whales, beluga whales, just amazing stuff. Thousands and thousands of starfish, jellyfish, things like that. But that was kind of the difference between the on water and off water was really what was the deal there. While we were kayaking, there were waterfalls, grizzly bears, caribou, everything on the water, and it was amazing. We were also in, it just kind of feels cool to me at like just a fundamental level to be just so far out there with what you have packed and what you are traveling with and like what you're capable of doing. And just like knowing that like there's been, I don't know, a couple other people to ever kayak the shore, and who has ever camped? We have camped, like probably nobody. It's just kind of cool to be so far out there, like hundreds of miles away from the most remote village, and then thousands of miles away from like the nearest CVS. So it's just kind of cool to like be in that mindset, be in that kind of life.
Yeah, and it's so funny you say that, because a lot of times, like, I'll pat myself on the back, just I'm in the middle of the Pemi wilderness, and I'm sort of like, I'm so far from civilization, but you're sort of like, hold my beer times 100 when it comes to going out into Alaska, like an adventure like you just went on. As far as the camp setup, obviously, like it sounds like you were responsible for sort of a disproportionate amount of the work, but how exactly does that work? Like how long, once you wrap up a day and you find your site, like how long does it actually take you to, get the water, set up the camp and get ready to go to bed? And then how long did you guys actually like sleep at night? And then, when would you normally get up?
Right. Yeah. It's really not that bad. I mean, it's like just having a good couple hours of chores, but it's after a long day of kayaking and you've got, infinite daylight. So I won't say it's like a huge deal. Like if you were solo doing all the chores yourself, it's not that big of a deal breaker. And that's kind of the mindset I adopted is I just said, if I was alone doing this trip, how could I complain about this right now? Right. So, but to answer your question, so we'd wake up 4:30, 5:30, maybe later if the weather dictated it. Although that was another struggle with Freya. She didn't seem to understand that Alaska's kind of a 24-hour decision-making realm where, you have light for 22 hours that's as bright as noon. And you've got 2 hours that's as dark as a full moon or dusk. So you can read a book inside the tent without a headlamp. So when you look at the weather and when you look at how you want to approach these different areas that you need to progress through, you can take the 24-hour clock into your consideration, right? It's not we only have 12 hours, 16 hours of daylight. That's not true, right? So you have this entirety of the time frame. So that was a big thing that we just were never able to kind of mesh on. As soon as I got into Alaska, I was like, well, time to adapt to whatever time frame we want. As long as the weather's good, we can paddle. And that's like how the previous trip reports that I've read, they would launch at 1 a.m. in calm waters, bang out a ton of miles and all that. And that was kind of a struggle in that regard. But after we set up camp, right, it's we get on the water at maybe 7. The days range from starting at 7 to ending at noon. Starting at 7 to ending at midnight. Huge days. And setting up camp, we both set up the tent immediately first. And then from then on, Freya empties her stuff into the tent, gets into her sleeping bag, whips out her laptop, starts typing on her blog, which I think takes a little bit longer for her because she's German. There's a difference in language. And then she also starts editing her pictures. And that is like her main objective as soon as she stops kayaking. Where as soon as the tent's up, you've got 2 kayaks by the water. You got to cook dinner. You got to set up your bear fence. You got to load the shotgun and wrap it up in between you. Obviously, you set up your own stuff to camp. And then there's the whole idea of, the decision-making talk of what the weather is tomorrow and how we wanted to look at that. I had one of the weather band radios that works like all over the globe. Freya actually has someone who sends her text messages on her Iridium sat phone that shows her what the weather will be the next day. I found it was kind of a 50% accuracy. So it's really wake up in the morning and see what you want to do, and figure out what the day is going to be. So that's the key. But yeah, the entire camp vibe is it's pretty tough when you look at it. If your partner is just immediately in their sleeping bag trying to warm their core body temperature, and you're in the pouring rain in your dry suit, it's definitely no matter how long it takes, a couple hours or so for chores at night, it's definitely a hard on the mental aspect of you're not chipping in at all. Why should I help you out? So
yeah, exactly. Do you so the original commitment? What were you going to do? Like 60 days or something? Like what was at what point did you bail out and say, you know what, I'm done with this and I'm moving on?
Yeah, so the bailout, kind of an interesting thing. The first week I got into the trip, we were in Wales. I started to understand what the dynamic was going to be. We were no longer quote unquote partners. we were no longer kind of sharing the duties of preparing for the trip equally. But after that, I had a realization myself. I kind of just looked. I also had an e-reader, and I was reading a lot of different just philosophy stuff. And I started to think more internally and more just what would I do if I had a stronger mind? What would I do if I could deal with this situation without creating a reaction that upset me? So I started to just think like that, right? And I just thought, if I was alone on this trip and I had to do all this stuff, this is what it would be like, but it would just be a little bit easier, right? I wouldn't have to, pull Freya's boat up to the launch. I wouldn't have to grab stuff out of her boat that she forgot. I wouldn't have to, do all this stuff, peg out the tent when it's pouring rain because she wakes me up to ask me to peg it out. All this stuff would have been done by me or done by me earlier solo, or maybe not even done by me, but it would have been easier. And so that's the mindset I adapted. And once I did that, the second week to probably the 7th week, I was able to create kind of a Zen state of how I approached interactions and conversations with Freya, and I just internalized and tried to see it as a challenge or a necessary duty to have a trip like this. And once I did that, it wasn't till the last of the weeks, 8 weeks in, I had been talking to Freya consistently about how huge it would be for me to reach Barrow. Barrow is the northernmost point on the continent, northernmost point in the United States. Just huge area with a lot of rich history, whaling, just amazing. And I wanted to kayak there. And about a week before we were going to end, Freya was saying, Cedric, our next kayak partner, needs to change in Wainwright, the village right before Barrow, because if he doesn't have anything, we want it to be able to be shipped to Barrow. After Barrow, there's no towns that you can get any resupplies, right? So I saw that. Makes sense. It definitely does. If he doesn't have some gear that he needs, after Barrow, you're shit out of luck. You got to improvise. But I thought it was also kind of after I'd expressed to Freya how much that meant to me, that was kind of one of the things that she took from me, because she didn't have any timelines, but she thought that was the best time to switch. And with me, I had more time, but at the end of it, it was also, we were at the point where she was, just trashing me on the blog to an extent that wasn't reality. She was making up her own reality, and I just decided to put down the throttle in the last couple of days and meet her at camp.
And is she still out there right now?
No. So what happened is I flew home, and she wrote a variety of blog posts about how I had bailed out early, and that I had quit before the end of the trip. But from when I started that week to the ending, she had explained that you need to leave at this time. You're no longer welcome on this trip. And it's just not reflected at all in her blog post, which kind of set the reality of the trip, right? I mean, I'm just a guy who lives in New Hampshire. I haven't kayaked continents and stuff. She's got a lot more, punching weight than me, and I'm only a guy who can talk about what actually happened. But so all that was kind of misrepresented, and I left in Wainwright to Barrow, and as soon as she understood that there was ice in Barrow, Cedric showed up. So he flew from New York to Seattle to Anchorage to Barrow to Wainwright, and was turned away from her trip. And that, to me, is, incredibly inconvenient, to say the least, to the guy who showed up like that. If I showed up after flying 4 flights, thousands of dollars, and was told to go home, I would be, a little bit ticked off.
So you think, I'm curious, and I see this with, the piece, as you're describing this, like I keep thinking about Diane Nyad, who was this like ultra swimmer. I think she swam from Cuba to Florida, and, she was always like sort of her public persona was always like really well established. She was all over the wide world of sports and all these different places in the 80s. And it turned out like the real stories behind the scene were that she was a complete monster. Do you think, like with Freya, do you think she loves the kayaking, or has it become this sort of beast that she just has to sort of deal with, where, it's her livelihood, it's what she's known for. She's made the commitment to complete the circumnavigation of these different locations, and she's sort of just stuck with having to deal with it, and she's just lost the love of the pursuit at this point.
Yeah, you are 100% right in your deduction. I honestly can see more life and more enthusiasm and more excitement and more personality in the Freya that has kayaked Australia and South America. In my trip, when I compare, who I thought was my hero, who I looked at as a person who, one, respected the local culture, 2, respected the environment, and 3, thought sea kayaking was, the way to enjoy your life. All 3 of those were just stripped away significantly, spending time with her after a couple of weeks. She's, we were at a campsite. I mean, this happened on a daily routine. We'd pack up and she would just frisbee her trash bag into the tundra behind us at the campsite. And she says, "This is how Alaskans throw away their trash." And, to me, I started picking it up. If you look at my Facebook posts, there's an earlier post with a huge trash bag mounted to my back deck. It's a white trash bag, and I'm carrying my trash and her trash. And then at a certain point, trash, always expands. It never is more compact, other than beers. But, if you have a thing of baby wipes, or if you have, a thing of Mountain House freeze-dried meals or something like that, and you're going to, get rid of the trash and crumple it up, it doesn't get a lot smaller. It starts to create a space problem. And so when we first launched at our at the beach in Wales, I was like, how the fuck, how are we going to understand, how to pack this trash? Like, am I the trash guy? Like, obviously it's going on the decks, because like every single millimeter of these hatches is full with non-trash items. And it just turned into this one, not respecting the environment. Every campsite, just throw your trash or bury it in a 2-inch sand hole or throw it under a log. 2, when you get to the villages, like, not really respect them. You just want the water, and you just want the local knowledge of how we're going to sea kayak. And then 3, she needs partners. She doesn't view having partners as a challenge, what she advertises. She doesn't view partners as being an actual partner. She needs partners to help her do what she's doing. So when her kayak's 350 pounds and she needs to move it because she's on the start of a 2.5 week resupply, she can't do it alone at her life right now. It's just the fact of how it's going. It's nothing against her. It's nothing against any partner. But she needs partners, and now she just leans on them to the extent that they are her Sherpas. And I was one of them, and I lasted as long as I possibly could. So I'm pretty proud of that, for sure.
It's really interesting. Like, I didn't know where the story was going to go, but it is fascinating. Like, I'm just, as you're talking, I'm sort of on her website, and she's got a lot of sponsors, and she's got a lot of accomplishments, but like we just touched on, I feel like sometimes, and I even talk about this with Stomp sometimes on the podcast, like, I love hiking, I love getting out there, and I haven't hit that position yet where I'm like, yeah, I just don't feel like hiking. It doesn't excite me anymore. Like, I'm still energized by it every time I go out. But I even said to Stomp, I said, if this podcast ever gets to the point where I feel like I'm hiking just to have content for the podcast, like, I don't want to get to that point ever. But it sounds like, again, I always circle back to Diane Nyad, and I know there's a guy that's hiking, like, he does all these crazy accomplishments in the White Mountains, and I sort of get the vibe that he's sort of in the same situation where the need to accomplish the goal takes away from the love of the activity that motivated you to start it originally, and I never want to get to that point. And it's just sort of sad to me that, somebody that is that accomplished just doesn't, if you've gotten so far where you're just tossing trash around Alaska, like, that's just, you've lost your way, it sounds like.
Right. Well, I think the key, especially, when you accelerate into doing more advanced things in your discipline quickly, which what I'm trying to reference is me from skiing, smaller peaks in the White Mountains to skiing Denali, or, going kayaking in Maine to kayaking in Alaska. The spice of life is key, right? You just need to switch up your discipline or what you're trying to experience. You can't, for Freya, she seems to take pride in that she has only done one thing, and she has only, kayaked since she could, have the experience to do these long trips. It doesn't, I don't think it makes you a richer person to just chase a goal that's like tough on you mentally and tough on you in terms of what you actually want to do for adventure. So that's definitely why I'm also, I ski, I do the kayaking, I love biking, and there's really no way that I would want to ski every single day of my life. That's kind of how you ruin something. And I think Freya is well past that point, but has already committed herself to, the next, I think, 9 or 10 years of paddling around North America. And she may do it, but she's going to need partners, and that's as easy as I can put it. She's going to need help. She is definitely going to need help.
Yeah, it is interesting because you always hear these people that talk about, like, find what you love and make that your job, and proceed at your own peril if you do that, because this is an example where maybe that's not the right idea. So any other thoughts or takeaways, Jeff, before we wrap it up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think once you get to the point where you think that you're able to disrespect the environment with littering and just making your camp wherever you can, and not respecting the fundamentals that everybody learns as they start going and adventuring outside, that's when I really think you've lost it. And that's what I'll leave it with, right? As long as you can respect, other than toilet paper, which you can bury and stuff like that, as long as you can respect the environment you're traveling through and still genuinely enjoy every day that you're out there, whether it's, a bad day or something that's not ideal for your timeline or plan, that's when you're doing something great. But when you start just treating it like a job, that's the red flag that I would look for. So, yeah, that's what I would say, Mike.
Yeah, and I would say I'm just like I'm poking on your Facebook page right now, and that I'm looking at that. I don't know if it's a sunset or a sunrise photo of Vinyl Haven here, but it seems like you're you got back at it with your friends, and you're holding on to it, doing it the right way. So
Yeah.
good for you, man. And I definitely want to have you back on for some backcountry ski talk later this winter.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me know. Preparing for a good winter, a couple months, and then we'll be skinning up and getting outside in the ice in the Northeast. So should be fun.
Very cool. All right, so I will. I'll put some of your info in the show notes here. And again, thanks so much for sitting down with us.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
All right, Stomp. So that was Jeff. We went a little long. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's worth it though. That's a great tale.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So I guess so I could never see that happening with me and you, Stomp. If we went on like a 2-week adventure and had to share a tent together, we'd be best friends forever, I'm sure.
Yeah, I guess so. Depends how big the tent is. I would bring a really big tent, 2-room maybe.
Yeah. That's what I don't know if I can handle that. Like,
I'd sleep in my kayak.
Well, my biggest fear would be you would be like, I'm going to go on my laptop and you can do all the work around camp. I would be like, I'm not doing that.
Oh, man, I might just stay up there and join the Inuit.
Yes.
Never see me again.
Yeah, exactly. But I think we're going to have to bail on the search and rescue news, so we'll table that for another episode. There's a few things going on that I definitely want to cover, but I think we just went a little too long here. So let's call this a wrap.
Excellent. Until next time.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to learn more about the topics covered on today's show, please check out the show notes and safety information on SLASRpodcast.com. That's SLASR podcast.com. You can also follow the show on Facebook and Instagram. We hope you'll join us next week for another great show. Until next time, on behalf of Mike and Stomp, get out there and crush some peaks.
Now covered in scratches, blisters, and bug bites, Chris Staff wanted to complete his most challenging day hike ever.
Fish and Game officers say the hiker from Florida activated an emergency beacon yesterday morning. He was hiking along the Appalachian Trail when the weather started to get worse. Officials say the snow was piled up to 3 feet in some spots, and there was a wind chill of -1 degree.
And there's 3 words that describe this race. Do we all know what they are? Only one hill!
Here's Lieutenant James Neeland, New Hampshire Fish and Game. Lieutenant, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
What are some of the most common mistakes you see people make when they're heading out on the trails to hike here in New Hampshire?
It seems to me the most common is being unprepared, and I think if they just simply visited hikesafe.com and got a list of the 10 essential items and had those in their packs, they probably would have no need to ever call us at all.